Hey, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today about the 4-day cyber disclosure rule and what it means for you. And you know this came out a little while ago about the Securities Exchange Commission saying, hey, you got to report within 4 days. And since then, there's been a lot of picking at it and a lot of talking about it. And so one of the things that we did was we decided to hold off on this webinar for a little bit and say, hey, let's see what's out there and let's see what bubbles up, so that we can bring you all the facts. Especially because when we think about who, and we look at the audience list of who usually comes to our webinars, a lot of you don't fall under the SEC. And so what we want to do is make sure that we give you, some of you do, some of you don't. We want to make sure we talk to you about how this impacts you, even if the SEC is not a governing body for you. And so that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today. As you can see in the chat, Forrest has already said hello from California. Let us know where you're joining from. We love to know where people are coming from. Which brings me to this slide, which Forrest beat me to. The chat is on the right. You can mute the chat if you want. I won't take offense if you mute the chat. But there's a little bell at the top, and you can turn the chat on or off. It'll ding, ding, ding. But do ask questions over the course of this. Do let us know what you're hearing. If you've read anything about this, and there's a really interesting article you've read, post it in the chat. I've read a ton of stuff from law firms and other cyber firms. I don't like to admit it, but there are actually other cybersecurity companies. Everybody in this will get a recording, and we'll put it on our YouTube channel, and everybody will get the slide deck, which we'll send out later. If you don't know us, we are Critical Insight, and we defend critical infrastructure against cyber attack. And what that means is we help organizations prepare for a cyber attack with risk assessments, incident response plans, getting ready to report for a 4-day rule, all those things. We help organizations detect and attack quickly with Security Operations Center. And that actually comes in here because, you need to know what the attack is and if there is an attack, which we'll talk about here. And then you need to be able to respond decisively. And those are the things that we help organizations with. Joining me today, Mike Hamilton and Fred Langston, both founders of the company. Fred's currently our Chief Product Officer. And really, Fred is also our main guy for helping organizations with regulation. He has done a lot of it on the consulting side. And Mike Hamilton is our CISO, and he's the former CISO of the city of Seattle. And he reads just about every government regulation that comes out and says, this is a big one, which he said about this the day it came out. Mike, this was July 26th that this happened.
Yep. Yeah. So these are just news articles that, we're kind of throwing all kinds of gas on the fire of what's happening here. And I think everybody really glommed onto 4-day reporting. There's no way we're going to know what's going on in 4 days. And, we may have to disclose things that could reflect badly on us, and it could give attackers additional information, or et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole lot more to this than just 4-day reporting. And so they went back and forth, and there was a comment period, and a lot of organizations and their lobbyists pushed back on this. And so what we ended up with was essentially what it started with some softening in certain places. So, this issue of materiality. It turns out it's not 4-day reporting. If you have some kind of incident, you don't need to contact the SEC immediately. This is to protect investors. So will that event have any impact on your financial reporting, your ability to maintain continuity of operations, things like this? It's more about that, and it's a lot about governance and how you manage risk. And so let's just dive in and talk about some of this stuff. So they want to protect investors. That's really what this is, because the 1% is not being protected. Okay, forget I said that. Fines, being extorted, class action suits that follow the unauthorized disclosure of protected records, those are risks to investors. So this is the SEC as the sector-specific agency for the finance sector trying to get in front of those things. There are annual and up to the minute requirements in this new rule. And so we're going to go through that. The annual updates are going to be about how are you conducting cyber assessment in your risk management techniques. Explain your governance and how the board is informed every quarter. What's your strategy around all this? And then the 4-day mandatory reporting only after the incident has been deemed material. And, you know, Fred and I were chatting about this, and it really all has to do with, would this affect financial filings, you know, to the extent that investors are going to get mad, for lack of a better term. Okay. So there are lots of forms that are needed when you are a publicly traded organization that you have to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission that are destined for the consumption of your investors, your shareholders. So Form 10Q is an annual filing. Form 10K is an annual filing. Form 10Q is a quarterly filing, right? So those really aren't the ones that you're going to use for incident reporting for a material incident. Those you're going to explain your governance and how you are managing risk and how cybersecurity is part of that and how the board is informed, et cetera, et cetera. And then Form 8K, that is the up to the minute stuff. So if there is some kind of impact to the organization through a cyber event, and after a period of time it is deemed material to the organization and that it couldn't affect investors, that's when you file that Form 8K. So that's the way the forms are going to work. And the 8K is the one to keep in mind if you are a publicly traded organization and one of these events does pop up. And we're not throwing any shade at United Health Group. It's just a handy image. All right. So first of all, what's an incident?
Wait, and hey, Mike, right before you get to what's an incident, one note on that 8K that I saw was there were a lot of people using ChatGPT and say, you know, just as an example, and saying, hey, if I had an incident that was like this, and telling ChatGPT, use Form 8K to write this, and they were doing that. One of the suggestions I saw was, even if you're not governed by the SEC, it's a good form to take a look at, because it has a lot of good instructions and the like. And so just something that I've seen out there, and a way that people are using, you know, ChatGPT to help them write a template for this.
That seems to make sense.
Yeah.
You know, so again, you know, I'm not going to throw shade on dirties, but let's do that. I always thought, for all of the talk about, you know, what could generative AI replace in terms of occupations, lawyers are the top of that food chain. I mean, it's all they ingest precedent, and then they create filings and documents based on established formulaic ways of doing that. That's perfect. So I don't see anything wrong with using something like generative AI to, you know, write up your Form 8K. That actually makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think it's that tough to do, though.
No, and I mean, I don't either.
You don't want to tell ChatGPT, you know, the details of your incident, though. That would be
no. It was more to use it as a template, not a, hi, I work at this organization and we just had this.
Yeah,
don't
we're being
do
extorted, and we expect a class action suit. Yeah.
It's worth noting that people spend enormous sums of money with their legal and communications department to get exactly what they want to say in those 8Ks, exactly wordsmith right. Because one word off can have significant impact on shareholder value and stock price. It's a fine art to write those well.
As evidenced by every time the Fed opens its mouth.
Yes.
I mean, there's going to be a class action lawsuit regardless of what you say, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's the point.
For another reason.
You don't want to say the things that open you up to broader class action. That's exactly one of the elements of what you say, is to limit your exposure to class actions in the process.
All right, Mike. Mike, what is an incident?
What is an incident? You know, I think I think that is intuitive to probably everyone that's on, our presentation here today. But one of the definitional nuances that they wrote in here was it can be a series of related unauthorized occurrences. It doesn't have to be one big thing. I cannot think of an example of a series of related unauthorized occurrences that ends up in totality to be material. But if I thought about it a little longer, I might come up with some kind of example. I just don't have one. And then they kind of lean into the whole, the CIA triad here, which, for the SEC, I think is a little bit of a cop-out, but, jeopardizes the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of a registrant's, that's the publicly traded organization, information systems or the information in there. I think that the integrity part of this doesn't get enough airtime because if I can access your records, I can change them. And, for all of the organizations to whom this is applicable, if you are a publicly traded health sector organization, a ton of stuff just fell on you, both from the SEC and from Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services wants you to establish governance. They want you to use the NIST cybersecurity framework when you do your annual HIPAA risk assessment. And now here's all of this about the mandatory reporting, about reporting up your governance and your risk management strategies and things like this. So, this doesn't, if you are in a sector and happen to be publicly traded, you're starting to get guidance coming from every direction here. Guidance coming from every direction.
There's a word here in this statement that troubles me deeply, and that is jeopardizes.
Jeopardizes.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean? To say does that mean a scan on my external firewall because they're looking for something, or does that mean that they've actually got a foothold and maybe the data is minutes away from being exfiltrated? What does it mean?
That's why I said this is a little bit of a cop-out here.
It's going to be a huge problem.
I mean, Fred, when we look at the reporting guidelines for healthcare, which I know there's some folks in the audience from healthcare, right? It's 500 records, right? You don't need to report to the what's called the wall of shame, which is the Department of Health and Human Services. You have to report, if it's more than 500 records. When I read this, it can be one, like you could have one user's laptop compromised, or I mean, maybe even not, and it would fit this definition, right?
I mean, I think about a stolen a stolen laptop with a hard drive encryption on it. Is that jeopardizing? That's one laptop. Well, I don't know, right? That's why I like what I do like about HIPAA. It gives you a set of records. It's well defined. Everybody agrees on it. I doubt anybody ultimately, when you get into court, is going to agree about this, and that's a problem. And I have a feeling this actually may get updated because of it's something that is requiring a filing that does not have the specificity to help people know, yes, I need to do this. I mean, most people are going to want to err on the didn't look like it was that bad. Let's not overreact here, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, this is going to put the attorneys in the middle of incident response.
Yeah.
Forrest is asking a good question here. What if there was an unauthorized disclosure of an employee stock ownership plan? So I don't know the elements of data in such a plan that would be personally identifiable, but to the extent that employees that own stock could be considered to be investors, then I think, yeah.
Well, again, it's, you're always looking at that materiality thing, and you have to put it through the lens that it's about financial reporting. Are your financial reports something people can trust to make decisions about investing in a company? So the question here becomes, does this say that they have weak security at company X because this happened, and therefore it's material because it shows they have weak security and they have risk? Or is it, no, this really isn't something that's going to cause a harm? And I think, Mike, we're going to get to this on a couple of slides a little bit later about what this means. What kind of harm has been done here to an investor? Well, yeah, you might say the employees that are stock owners, they got impacted here because they got exposed. But as far as materiality to the stock price, I don't think
Probably
so.
no impact.
Yeah, I'm gonna play lawyer here for a second, even though I'm not a lawyer and only play one every now and then on TV.
Maybe the Chat
But
GPT
employee
lawyer.
stock ownership plans are not overseen by the SEC; they're overseen by the Department of Labor. So,
Right.
if that if there was a breach there, and I was an attorney for an organization, I might say, sorry, not overseen by the SEC. But I
And
don't know.
what about W-2 information? That's not regulated by the SEC either, but by virtue of the fact that it's personally identifiable, there's going to be litigation after that.
Yeah, that's the harm part. There will the class action lawsuit that will follow.
That's the harm.
Is the harm component, right? So
yeah. Okay, all right, let's keep going. We're never going to get through this. So incident reporting. This is one of the places where the language was softened based on the feedback that they got. So the materiality of an incident without unreasonable delay. All right, that sounds kind of squishy. I don't think there's solid guidance about what unreasonable delay really means. The phrase that they had used before, which I can't remember now, was equally amorphous. But this is the one that they came up with after the comment period and the feedback. So 4 days after an event is deemed material, and we'll get to materiality here in a minute, a description of what happened, the timing, and what you think the material impact is going to be, right? Including both on finance and your operational continuity. There are a couple of places you can hide. These safe harbors are for, ordinarily, if there is an ongoing investigation by law enforcement, you don't need to report. And this is kind of that. So U.S. Attorney General can say, hey, disclosing this could be a threat to national security. So keep it quiet, and we're going to give you 30 days. And I believe that can be extended as well. And then there's another FCC rule that requires Secret Service notification within seven days. And you can delay that 8K for those 7 days in the event that the Secret Service says, we want to investigate this and its disclosure would impede the investigation. You're allowed to pull back for that 7 days. So, that's giving them an opportunity to come in, and what they would do is extend that. Would say, investigations ongoing, keep your mouth shut. So there's a little bit of a conflict between law enforcement and Securities and Exchange Commission on that, and law enforcement wins. Okay, incident materiality. So reasonably straightforward. If an incident would disrupt or degrade your critical operations, right? What it takes for you to stay in business. So this could be, your servers. This could be your internet connection. This could be all kinds of things. And I think that's more technical than anything else. And then adversely affect the CIA, right? Again, leaning into the definitions that we use in information security, whether that is personal, confidential, or proprietary. So personal, W-2 records, right? Confidential, intellectual property, proprietary intellectual property. Confidential, some of the mechanics of a corporation are not to be disclosed to the public. So anything like that is disclosed in an unauthorized way would be material to the business, and then directly harm the business. And this is where Fred and I were talking about, what all would come in here. Would just straight up records disclosure that really doesn't affect the operational continuity of your business, but because we can expect fines, additional regulatory scrutiny, and possibly, and today probably, a class action suit, depending on the content of those records, that will harm the business. It's going to cost a lot of money. You're going to have a big write down. Your insurance costs are going to go up, things like that. So here's the guide here on what constitutes a material incident. But I think Fred's guidance is the best. It's going to go back to your financial filings, and will this have an impact on those filings?
I think one of the fascinating things about this is one of the first pieces of guidance ever from the government where you see them talking not just personal and confidential, but they're talking about proprietary information. The government is finally leaning into, well, that's the really what we're one of the things we're trying to protect here. And
Yeah.
we know that nation states are, I think the U.S. It might have been Homeland Security, it might have been the Department of Defense, but they announced that China is putting in all their efforts now to steal our space industry's secrets. They have massive campaigns now to steal intellectual property from all of our, aerospace companies. So this is one of the first pieces of guidance that's not talking PII or financial record disclosure or something. It's if you lose your important stuff, you need to report that. And that is really a sea change. That's something new that people have to think about. Now, what does it mean? Have I identified what is my proprietary information? Have I data classification policy that defines I just lost proprietary information? Now it's material and I need to report that. So you need to think about these things because it's adding a little bit of nuance that an attorney will find. And the thing I always want to say too is one of the best tests for any of this is the witness stand test. If you were to get up, had to testify as to your actions and how you approach reporting an incident, you should be able to justify your actions. If you feel you cannot do that on a witness stand, you probably should reevaluate your position.
And so, and one of the things that I want to do here is, a lot of the folks in the audience here are not in public companies. And so, I also want to say, Fred, I think that even if you're not a public company, this allows you to reframe the thinking around your own reporting, your own breaches, what might happen to you, who you need to report to. And, also if the SEC is doing this type of reporting might be coming for your industry, right?
Yeah, well, it's even more so. Most people, if you're a service provider, you provide some kind of business-to-business services, quite likely you're dealing with somebody who's a publicly held company, right? You're selling your service to them. They are going to pass these requirements contractually. They have to, by law, pass these down to you. So if your customer base includes anybody who's a publicly held company, you're going to have this passed down to you. You're going to have a plan and a program and the ability to identify these things and report on them because they won't sign a contract with you because they can't sign a contract with you, frankly, unless you're willing to agree to this. So, everything always starts at usually publicly held companies. It starts filtering down contractually to the rest of the world. Everybody raises, the rising tide raises all boats. So the security bar gets raised, good thing. But it's the top-down industry-driven controls that eventually trickle down to everybody. So everybody's going to feel this.
Yeah, and there's also an emphasis on third parties here coming up.
Yes, and I want to point out we're talking in the SEC here, but the day later, the National Credit Union Administration came out with a 72-hour or 3-day reporting rule to, I guess, one up the SEC or something like that, and with a very similar set of requirements about materiality because they're providing credit and they're a financial institution. So it's going to happen way out in the future. It happened one day after this dropped.
And I want to lean into something Fred said a little bit about your intellectual property. And yeah, we have been hemorrhaging intellectual property mainly to China. And I think the government is permanently mad over the fact that there is a plane on a Chinese tarmac that looks just like an F-35 because it essentially is. So when we're talking about publicly traded organizations that have intellectual property that's critical to the United States, that's who's going to have their necks stood on. And so I'm looking at you, Applied Materials, for semiconductor fabrication, Lam Research, companies like that. But also, like Fred said, our space economy is starting to heat up. We're going to be mining asteroids pretty soon. And, all that is part of, the global competition going on. So watch your IP. Okay. The things that you need to report annually: risk management strategy and your governance. All right. So what are your processes for doing these things? And you can say we use the NIST cybersecurity framework, and we've added fields for likelihood of an outcome and the impact of that outcome. So it is now risk assessment. We do that annually. How have those processes been integrated to your overall risk management? Because publicly traded organizations, they know all about risk on lots of different levels. They openly discuss earthquake, asteroid strike, civil unrest, all kinds of things factor into risk management. Cybersecurity has not really typically been one of those things. And so they want to make sure that that's integrated in there. Are you using third parties for this? Are you doing it yourself? How is this happening? And how are you engaging those? Because see where we're landing here, whether the registrant has processes to oversee and identify such risks from cybersecurity threats associated with its use of any third-party service provider. Your third-party service provider can be a company like us that does managed detection and response. We have to show our security papers all the time. We saw this coming a long time ago. It is a competitive differentiator for you to be able to show your security papers. And as we are getting lots of guidance from lots of agencies right now. And I think this all ties back to what happened to the Colonial Pipeline when we found out that the TSA was the sector-specific agency for pipelines and never told them anything about, your.
Well, Mike decided
I guess we lost Mike there for a second.
Right.
Well, he'll have to come back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as Mike was saying here, whether the registrant has processes to oversee and identify risks from cybersecurity threats associated with the use of a third-party service provider, that third-party service provider thing is becoming increasingly important.
Yes.
And one of the things that we just did as an organization is we do a healthcare breach report. And I mentioned that HHS wall of shame. One of the things that increases quarter after quarter after quarter is third-party breaches. And, Fred, you have been preaching the importance of this.
I mean, well, it's just from an attacker's perspective, I'm going to go after one entity that has connections to hundreds or has data from thousands of other providers. That way I don't have to hack 1,000 people. I just hack one, right? Yep. So it's kind of like where do the robbers go to steal money? They go to the bank because that's where everybody puts all the money. So it's the same concept. If you're a service provider, you're servicing hundreds, thousands of clients. You maybe have direct network connections into their environment or at least have their data. So if you're a third party in this day and age, you have a giant target on your back. And it's unfortunate, but it's true.
Yeah. So people, everybody is protecting themselves from their business associates.
Yeah.
That is not likely to abate at all. Again, starting with, the TSA saying, okay, pipelines, start using the NIST cybersecurity framework and reporting your results up. This is just starting to percolate everywhere. So it is impossible that it does not land on every organization that is doing business with regulated entities, whether that's through the SEC or Health and Human Services or the Coast Guard and ports. There's a lot of examples of this right now. Pipelines, rails just got news, aviation. Okay, so it's going to land on third parties, probably in greater requirements that you're going to get contractually when you're doing business with, a bigger company. All right, and here's page 2, right? Whether any risks have materially affected or are reasonably likely to materially affect the register. And remember, this is an annual filing. So in this annual filing, you're saying, we're worried about this thing happening, which could go bad. I don't think that's smart to have in there, but that is what it says. How is the board of directors being informed, and do you have good representation on your board by somebody who knows how to talk about this to that kind of audience? Right? This is not, it does no good to, go in and be Mr. Hyper Technical or Ms. Hyper Technical and, whip out all the secret handshake language. You have to distill this into business terms. And so then what is management's role in assessing the material risks from these threats? Well, that role is going to be to evaluate risks, determine whether or not we're going to accept, avoid, mitigate through controls or transfer through insurance, and then following through with that and actually performing an action right? If we are going to mitigate an identified risk through controls, well, then you need to budget for whatever you need in terms of a mitigating control there. So that's what management role, to me, that's what management's role is. That plus making sure that all of the things are being done on time, these filings can occur. All right, so that's the annual stuff.
And by the way, and as when you get to the summary here,
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say I put a question in the chat for folks. I was curious, has your exec team or board brought up this new SEC rule? Whether you are, over whether you do have SEC oversight or not. One person says, yeah, fortunately, our office was already prepped for it and had policy versions with SEC verbiage prepared. I'm curious, other folks, put in the chat, is this something that your organizations are talking about or not? All right, Mike, keep going.
Let me just say, Lou is a friend of mine. He and his team punch way above their weight. They're in front of everything that comes out. Okay.
I have to say that the reasonably likely statement on the previous slide.
Yeah.
That is just another landmine they've laid. That is not the
I
kind
agree.
of language that should never be in a standard. It can be in guidance, absolutely. This is in guidance. This is a directive. There's no way to legally say exactly what is reasonable and what is likely. I mean, highly likely. Maybe we could lean into that. Use some risk assessment approach, but I mean, most of the stuff that we face is likely. It's just not, may not have the opportunity for it to happen. But if you were to report every likely threat, I don't understand. I don't understand how you do
that. Right. So, would you file something about generative AI could be used to create phishing messages that fool our users, and we think that might end up being a material? I see the same thing you do, Fred.
Yeah.
All right. So a bit of a summary here. Have to integrate cybersecurity into your overall risk management. Presumably there was already a risk management function within the corporation. Disclose your governance. How are you evaluating these risks and then budgeting for potential mitigating controls or transfer through insurance, right? How is your management involved in that? What is your risk management strategy? And again, everyone is leaning into the NIST cybersecurity framework as a tool to use for risk management. Health and Human Services in particular just told the health sector, hey, that HIPAA risk assessment you got to do every year, we want you to use this tool to do it, right? So that we start to, level the playing field and we can start comparing results, intra-sector and intersector. What are your material cybersecurity risks? Yeah, that could be a very long list. So I still think that there is sausage to be made with this, and there may be a revised rule later, but that's what it says now.
I think there's an implied kind of new requirement, and that's the ability to effectively go out and identify when something is going wrong and it is material. That is not something that many organizations do well in a rapid fashion. Sometimes it can take weeks before they get to the point where they think that they've chased something down. So having a defensible method to say, here's how we determined whether this was material and the process we executed, and that process executed in a rapid fashion. I think to protect yourself, if you ever end up in court, you're going to need to show that you have that process in place. Because most people will say, well, we met in a room and we talked about it and somebody raised their hand and we took a vote. That'll work, but I think you need something a little bit more concrete and evidence-based, frankly.
Yeah, well, like what Phil's pointing out here, right? Your risk register. If you have a ritual that you go through where you have identified and cataloged your risks and you've assigned dispositions to them, accept, avoid, mitigate, transfer, and then you're working through that, right? The ones you're going to mitigate, you throw over the fence to technical teams. You may be going to the organization itself to get funding for a capital purchase that you might need, right? If you can show these things, that's pretty compelling. And again, for getting funding, right? You're saying, but this has got to be backed up by a governance organization, right? If you're, if you're in IT and you're the Stuckey for security, well, you got to run the risk register. That's not the same as having an organization, a committee that meets quarterly where you say, okay, here's some things we got to do something about. Our recommendation is that we make this purchase or hire this FTE or whatever to mitigate this risk. That committee, that organization is perfectly okay to say, nope, we're going to accept that risk. Those fingerprints are real important to get on there. So, this issue of a risk governance committee is really big. Okay, so if you are a public company, what should you do? Well, exactly what Lou said. Review your policies and make sure that you are aligned with the expectations of this rule. Start your planning for these 8K disclosures when you have to do those, and that's gonna pop up. But then there's the battle rhythm of your annual and quarterlies that are going to have to contain this information too. Again, get a governance committee together. Got to have one of those. Cyber risk has got to be one of the topics discussed and adjudicated there. Make sure your board of directors has somebody that is good at articulating these risks to an executive audience, right? People that are more worried about balance sheets and revenue and, being EBITDA positive than, scary Russian cyber buffer overflow. Third-party contracts to create an incident reporting requirement. This is now where we're starting to land on the third parties, because everybody's going to get new agreements that say something happens to you, you got to tell us. And there's probably going to be, probably not a standard set of time, but it's going to be a defined set of time within X days or something like that. And then, think about escalation procedures. When you have something like that, you need to go through the process of determining whether it's material. If it is, you need to do that 8K filing, and that's got to happen 4 days after that decision has been reached. So all these things are preparation for this rule landing on you. If you're not a public company, which I think is most of the folks on the presentation here, this third-party risk management, we've said this forever, that your ability to show your security papers is today and will continue to be a competitive differentiator. You will get more business.
And let me tell a story there.
Sure.
There's an organization that we work with where they have a very smart security guy who kept saying, we need to do this. The organization kept putting it off. Well, last year they lost 5 deals because somebody came to them and said, you got to show your security papers. And, they did a whole bunch of hand waving and said, talk to our security guy, but they didn't have any papers. And so, now, they're going through their SOC 2 process and they'll have them. But, this is, it doesn't matter if you're a public company, this is something that you got to do now.
Yeah. It's all landing on everybody here. And this was anticipated. When the federal government came out with, first changed the rhetoric around the use of ransomware in critical infrastructure, and you're not a criminal anymore, you're a terrorist. And then the DoD defend forward strategy and the Department of Justice, shutting down criminal infrastructures and apprehending and prosecuting. All those things started to happen. And then they leaned into the sector specific agencies and said, you will start supplying guidance to your sector about cybersecurity. You're going to advocate for the use of the NIST cybersecurity framework. Now we're getting to things like mandatory reporting. All of this cascades down. And, you can say a rising tide lifts all boats. I mean, that's one way to look at it. Or you can say, damn, this is all landing on me, but nobody's going to be able to get away from this.
But I do think
$8 trillion in losses last year. All right.
Yeah.
Third largest economy in the world is cybercrime.
I do think, so if you're not a publicly traded company, this is a really good moment for you to take this and say,
Yes.
hey, look, this is a reason to talk to my board. This is a reason to talk to my execs and say, hey, we got to start doing these things, and moving towards, getting a SOC 2 type 2 or something like that is a good way to do it. Fred, I know, we've certainly heard, we have manufacturing clients, and, one, does business with a major distributor, or I guess major seller. And they, all of a sudden got a request to, where are your security papers, even though they've had a relationship for years and years and years. And so, Fred, this is a good time for security people, IT people, to bring these things up and say, this is the year to do it.
Yeah, there's a whole space here that we call third-party risk management or vendor risk management. It is something that has existed all the way back until the 90s with HIPAA, when we created the business associate approach and made everybody sign business associate agreements. The problem in the healthcare world was they drafted a bunch of standard business associate agreements that had some security stuff in there, and they never evolved. And the reality is the world rapidly evolved. The threats, the things you need to include in a contract with a vendor that you're sending your PII or providing critical services to, you need to understand their security posture in this day and age, and you need to pass all of those requirements down contractually. And the thing we can't emphasize enough, security starts in procurement. Okay, that's that's the beginning of security. And if you are not, including security requirements in your procurement process, if you're not including contractual agreements that protect yourself, as well as pass down regulatory requirements that you need to pass down, and if you're not maintaining some visibility into the security posture of your vendors, like annually show me you had a pen test, or that you're doing quarterly vulnerability assessments, if you're not doing those things, you're gonna have holes in that program. So it is something that it's not just a one-off thing now. It's a program. You probably even need to have someone in your procurement department take this on as a responsibility to manage that.
I think, and you can keep me honest on this, Fred, isn't the letter of the law that if you're a business associate to a covered entity under HIPAA, that you are subject to those requirements yourself?
Absolutely. And you can be audited by the Office of Civil Rights, DHS, HHS, Office of Civil Rights can audit you.
And I think that's where this is going. Yeah. Pretty soon they're just going to be overt with language like that. Yeah. Okay. So if you're not a public company, here's some good things to think about doing. And again, this will help get business, because if you do start with procurement, one of the things that you're going to evaluate is the security of your business associates, your vendors, suppliers, Okay. So to get ready for stuff like this, there's ways we can help you if you think you need help. If you don't, you're perfectly okay to set up processes like this yourself, right? But cooperative incident response, how are you going to participate with a business associate of yours, especially if it's a larger publicly traded organization that's got that expectation that you will, and potentially embodied in a contractual agreement. You put together, some kind of system where you can, if not undergo audits because you handle credit cards or health records or criminal justice information, think about bringing in voluntary auditors every year, right, against the SOC 2, right, SSAE 18. In order to do that, you're going to have to go through a process of going, okay, what's our scope? Which of the trust principles are we going to be audited against? And then there's a set of artifacts that you need to collect, and you need to collect those for some period of time, because when the auditors come in, it's a backward looking audit. An auditor can't say, give me a log message that will be made 6 months from now, right? It's all backward looking. So you're going to have to amass that set of artifacts. And this gets you into shape for being able to show those security papers and to be able to meet the expectations that the SEC is going to have for publicly traded organizations, business associates, vendors, service providers, etc. And the other thing, monitor your network. Prevention fails. I mean, we're going to say that every time. That and patch Chrome.
Mike always says patch Chrome.
It's because it's always true. Here's a tool you can use.
And before you go to the tool, real quick, Mike, go back to the last slide for a second. The other thing is, if you're looking at your whole organization and, you have a incident response plan and a tabletop exercise, Fred, isn't part of that now, hey, are we going to be able to report in 4 days? Doesn't that just become part of your IRP?
It's part of your plan. It's part of but you got to run through the tabletop, like you said, Jake, because there are decisions that need to be made. You need to, like I said, you need to bring in skilled expertise to write these 8Ks, right? So that's a whole thing that's not, show me someone that's got writing an 8K as part of their plan. I don't know anybody that's got that as part of their IR plan. It should be added because that's something you need to bring to bear. You need to bring the attorneys, your communications people. Again, it's just yet another one of those things that gets added onto that process. And again, you need to test people on it because making tough decisions on what you're going to say, that's an exercise worth going through.
Yeah, I was just talking to you had mentioned earlier the credit union 72-hour thing. So same idea, right? It's just faster. And I know that there's a credit union that we work with that's like, hey, we need a new incident response plan that includes the 72-hour rule. Same thing, right? So, all right, Mike, now you can go to the next slide.
Okay, so everything is starting to converge around the use of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And notice that version 2.0, which came out earlier this month, I think it was August 8th, has this new focus area domain for governance. That is a way. So if you use this to do your risk assessment, which everybody's supposed to do annually, you can start to fill in the parts about governance and be able to demonstrate all that to your business partners, especially when the corporations and their shareholders are looking at you. We got to do it. You got to do it too. This is the best tool to use because it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say have this control in place. It says make this thing happen. And if you do use this, and I know there's several folks on the call today who do, we do. When you go through that process, you identify your risks, you come up with a corrective action plan, and then you can budget out those corrective actions. It's real handy. So I think that's enough said about that. We've talked about this at length, and we're actually going to do it again here with another partner company. But this NIST 2.0 is really worth digging into. Okay, Jake, back to you.
So, one quick thing on the NIST CSF is Mike has a spreadsheet that he's developed. I think along with
Lou.
With Lou, yeah.
And I just want to be clear, Lou did most of the work.
Okay, well, anyway, if you want the spreadsheet about which helps you align your organization to NIST CSF, shoot me an email, jake@criticalinsight.com, and I'll get you the spreadsheet. And then Mike will spend a half an hour with you, talking through it. So if that's of interest to you, shoot me an email.
And we get a little instruction primer too, so that you can do this yourself.
But when we think about our how we help organizations, and we think about the the SEC 5-day, or when we think about the SEC rule, or we think about that credit union rule, or we think about hey, how are you going to bring any of this to your to your organization, even if it's not publicly traded. I talked about incident preparedness. That's something you can see in what we provide under prepare. We help organizations with that. We talked about the need for detection, because you got to know when an incident is happening, right? You don't want the bad guy to be in your system for 200 days, and that's what the SOC as a service does in the middle. And the stuff on the right, respond. When you within that 4 days, you want to start your response. So those are things that we help with. And Fred, as we mentioned before, that the vCISO service is also something that organizations may need as they dive into this.
Yeah, especially if you're, trying to execute on a roadmap, you need somebody that's got that expertise to basically guide the organization, provide, progress reports, report all that up, of course, to executives and or the board. So having that person that can, guide the ship, do the executive level reporting, keep the program moving forward, and hopefully demonstrate the value of the program. That's a key. It's a key asset. Lacking that, it's everybody's doing it on the weekend and nights, and that's not fun or effective.
Yeah. Couple of additional things. Number one, we do a survey at the end of all of these, and my colleague Ginny is going to put the survey in the chat here. Was this helpful? And we always want to hear from folks. We also have a question in there about whether you think you're prepared for this 4-day rule. Curious about that. And we're curious to hear your answers. As we heard in the chat, we see that, that Lou is ready. Are other folks ready? We'd love to know. So don't forget to take the survey. Mike puts out a daily email called the Daily Blast. If you're not signed up for that, you can sign up on our website. We do bi-weekly security awareness training and of course, regular panels just like this one, which you know about because you're here. Yes, just like this one. I want to get some final thoughts from Fred and Mike here. But before I do, my email address is up there, as is Mike's. The other thing that Ginny will put in the chat is a Calendly link. If you're the kind of person who likes to just click on that to chat with us about that NIST spreadsheet or any of the other things, feel free to use that. And we'd love to hear from you. But let's do final thoughts on today on the SEC rule. Let's do Fred and then Mike. Go ahead, Fred.
Sure. If you think 4 days is a long time, it is an eyelash, bat in time in the middle of an incident. Incident time is a totally different time frame than normal time. Things are moving at light speed. You have an entire team trying to move as fast as possible, and you need to make some critical decisions that may influence the entire future of your stock price, your company, and you have to do that all at the same time. So you got to prepare ahead, folks. I don't think anybody's really going to be able to pull this off if you're trying to do it all within a 4-day window.
All right, Mike, final thoughts.
I think the whole 4-day reporting thing, even though that grabbed everyone's imagination, that's the least important part of this. Yeah, it's going to be important, and your general counsel is going to have to get used to the incident response process, because now they're always going to need to have a seat at that table to determine whether or not they're going to have to make that report. The bigger thing is the governance and the risk management and how that needs to be reported annually and quarterly, and how this is cascading down onto third parties. So everybody, this is written for publicly traded organizations, but it's going to really trickle down. So keep an eye on everything.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really hope you got a lot of this. Don't forget to take the survey, and we look forward to seeing you at the next panel. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a good day.
Yep. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.